Hello everyone, welcome to BioXplaining. This is the fourth part of the topic pollination in plants. Very quick recap about what we have studied in the previous video. Let's see that agents of pollination are of two categories. What are they? Agents of pollination. They are of two categories. One we call to be the biotic factors and the other the abiotic factors. So what does biotic means? Biotic refers to the living organisms which function as the agents of pollination, and abiotic refers to the non-living factors that are present. So in the previous video, what have we focused on? We focused on the biotic factors, and there we spoke about pollination by bees. Then we understood pollination by elephants. We saw pollination by birds, and we also saw pollination by bats. In this video, what are we going to focus on? We are mainly going to focus on the abiotic factors of pollination. Namely, we will discuss pollination by wind and pollination by water. Begin with pollination by wind. So pollination by wind is also known as anemophily. Wherever you find the term anemo, you should know that we are talking about the wind. Like, you will know that when you study geography, you find anemometer. So that refers to an instrument which is used to study characteristics of wind. Right. So anemo refers to wind. And we know from our previous video that what does phily or phile means? Phily refers to affinity. Okay. So anemophily refers to the transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower by the help of the wind. Now, for example, different wind pollinated flowers are maize, palm, pine, wheat, etc. Right? So this is just an image showing us the male inflorescence, or rather in simple words, the male flower, and the female inflorescence or the female flower of a wind pollinated flower. Now, what are the characteristics of these wind pollinated flowers? The first is that the flowers are colorless or dull, they are tiny and without fragrance. Definitely, because they do not have any insects to attract or birds to feed nectar to, so they need not be very bright and showy. They even need not have fragrance, so they are dull or colorless, small in size, and they do not have sweet fragrance. The pollen grains of such flowers are colorless, tiny, dry and light, and are produced in large numbers. So can you understand why the pollens are produced in large numbers? We've been discussing this over and over again, that in case of cross-pollination, there are chances of wastage. So even if wastage occurs, to increase the chances of pollination and for the fertilization, these flowers produce pollen in abundance. And the third characteristic of such flower is the stigma is large and feathery, and they protrude out of the flower so that they can easily catch the pollen grains when they are flowing through the wind. Using this image, let us try understanding the characters all over again. First, see that the pollen grains are small and light and they occur in very large numbers. Secondly, the anthers are exposed to the wind so that pollen can easily be blown away. Say the wind is blowing in this direction and the anthers are releasing the pollen grains. So when the wind blows past the anther, what happens is this wind carries away the pollen grains along with it. So because these pollen grains are small as well as light, they can be easily carried away by the wind. The third character is stigma are feathery to catch pollen carried by the wind. Say the wind is coming from a certain direction. Say this is the direction the wind is coming from, and it is carrying the pollen grain from some other flower. So when this wind passes by this stigma, what happens is the pollen grains get attached, they get trapped within the stigma. So because the stigma are feathery, they can easily hang around and they can trap the pollen grains. The fourth character we have is no scent or nectary, because the pollination is done by the wind, not by any living agent like bees or birds. So they need not attract those pollinators. As a result, no sweet fragrance is required and even no nectar is required. The fifth character is the petals are small and green, as there is no need to attract insects. That means the petals do not have to be brightly colored or showy for insects to get attracted. So now let us understand how does the pollination actually occur. Okay, so the same image that we have seen just a while ago, I'm keeping it here in the same slide so that you can better relate to it. So as the wind is blowing, the pollen from the outwardly hanging anthers is blown away easily. So in this diagram, what is shown here? See this tassel. This tassel refers to the male inflorescence, that means which contains the anthers. So they will release the pollen grains, and as the wind blows in this direction, the wind is going to carry away these pollen grains along with it. Now the anthers are very loosely attached to the filament, right? So say this is the filament, the anthers are very loosely attached and dangling. So as the wind comes and hits them, they can easily release the pollen grains, which the wind will carry away, right? Then what will happen is the pollen is being carried by the wind, and now they'll go and fall on the feathery stigma of some female flower. Let's say here you see the cob. For some other plant also, the same female flower will be present. So now when the wind blows past this cob, the pollen grains are going to get deposited on the surface of the female flowers, right? Now, in case of flowers which are wind pollinated, there is a condition that the male flowers will mature earlier than the female ones, right? So if you remember the conditions that we studied in a previous video, this is known as protandry, wherein the male part has matured much earlier than the female part. Why is this done? This is done to ensure that only cross-pollination occurs and self-pollination does not occur, right? So because the male flowers mature earlier, there are very little chances or almost no chances of self-pollination. So the next kind of pollination that we'll see is pollination by water, which is hydrophily, right? So the word hydro means water, and we know that what does phily means? Phily or phile refers to affinity, which refers to liking. Okay, so what is hydrophily? The transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower via water. Now, definitely the examples of flowers which undergo hydrophily should be aquatic plants such as Hydrilla and Vallisneria. So what are the characteristics of these water pollinated plants? The first is that the pollen grains are light and they should be unwettable. Why should they be light? Why should they be unwettable? Because these pollen grains will have to survive in water, right? So they need to be light so they can very easily float, and they need to be unwettable, otherwise the water will destroy them, right? So the presence of a substance that is known as the mucilage helps to make these pollen grains unwettable. The next characteristic is that pollens are produced in large numbers. So this goes without saying. I've been saying this repeatedly for all the types of cross-pollination that we are studying, that in case of cross-pollination, pollen is produced in abundance, so that even if pollens get wasted, you can make up for this loss by producing the large numbers. Clear enough? Right. Third is that the male flowers are very small. Then the flowers are nectarless because they do not have insects or birds to attract. and the flowers are also odorless for the same reason, because they do not have any pollinators to attract. Taking the example of Vallisneria. So what happens in Vallisneria is that if you look into the diagram very carefully, the male flowers float on the surface of water. Can you see these small structures, these male flowers? So they float on the surface of water until they come and meet the female flowers. Now, the pollen grains that are produced by these male flowers have their specific gravity, or in simple words, you can understand the density almost equal to that of water. So what happens is they do not sink down. So they keep on floating just below the surface of water. So what happens is, in case of Vallisneria, the male flowers and the female flowers are born on separate plants. That means there are separate unisexual flowers, separate staminate flower and separate pistillate flowers that are born on different plants. Then once these male plants or the male flowers get matured, they separate from the parent plant. As soon as they separate from the parent plant, what do? They start floating on the surface of water. As we have just seen, the small male flowers, they keep floating on the water surface. Then what happens is, simultaneously, the female flowers rise to the surface of water and float. So now what is the condition? That the male flowers have matured and they are floating on the water surface. At the same time, the female flowers have also risen and they are also on the surface of water, right? So now the male flowers will keep floating on the surface until they meet the female flower. So the male and the female flowers come into contact with each other. The pollen grains from the male flowers will stick to the stigma of the female flowers, and yes, pollination has been done. So we are done studying about the abiotic agents of pollination. Now what we are going to study is a process that we call to be artificial pollination. So the name itself tells you that naturally no pollinator is doing the work. What is being done is man himself is transferring the pollens from the anther to the stigma, right? So what happened was, in ancient civilization of Babylonia, there was a very common practice that people would take male flowers and sprinkle them on female flowers. They would do this with palm flowers, right? So they would do this so that they could get the new generation flowers having some different desirable characters. So at that time, people did not have any understanding of the sexuality of flowers. They did not know that what is the androecium, what is the gynoecium, how is pollination occurring. They had no understanding of that. All they knew was that if they sprinkled the male flowers on the female flowers, some changes would take place and the new flowers had different or desirable or good characters than the parent flowers, right? So this is how the concept of artificial pollination came up. So now let us understand what actually artificial pollination is, or how do we do it. So the first step is the anther is removed in the bud condition from a bisexual flower, right? So this condition, or this, is known as emasculation. So see, you know what we say, masculinity. In normal English, masculinity means male characters, right? So the anther is the male part of a flower. So if you remove the anther from a flower, now what has it become? It has become emasculated, or rather it is a female flower now. It does not have its male part, right? So what we do is, this female flower is emasculated. This step is known as bagging. That means only the female flower that we have is covered in a plastic bag. Why is it covered in a plastic bag? So that any kind of pollen grains cannot come and pollinate it naturally. We do not want the natural pollination to occur. So we have well protected this female flower in a bag, right? Now what we do is, whichever good qualities we want to incorporate, will collect the pollen grains of those male flowers. So mature and viable pollen grains are collected from the male plant of our choice that we want to use to pollinate. Then we have to open this bag, that is the emasculated female flower that has to be opened, and we have to dust or sprinkle the pollen grains on the female flower. And then we have to replace the bag immediately. So what have we done? We have taken a flower, a bisexual flower is taken. We have removed the male part. So only female part is left. We have bagged it and protected it. We have let it to reach its mature stage. Once that is mature, we have collected mature pollen grains from our desirable male plant. And we have brought it, opened our bag and sprinkled it on the female flower. And then we have replaced the bag. Right? So artificial pollination has taken place in this way. Just a very basic outline of how artificial pollination or artificial crossing is occurring. So what we have with us is a bisexual flower, right? When we have a bisexual flower, means the female part as well as the male part both are present. So first what we are doing to this flower, we are going for emasculation. What is emasculation? Emasculation means that the anthers are being removed from the flower. So now what do you have left? What you have left with you is a pistillate flower. So what is a pistillate flower? A pistillate flower is one which only has the female part. The male part of the flower has already been taken out. No male part is present. Then what you have to do? Then you basically have to cover this pistillate flower in a bag. So when you cover it in a bag, what do you call that process to be? You call that to be bagging. After bagging is done, what we do? We have to collect viable pollens from the desirable male plant. So whichever male plant we want to use for pollination, we'll collect pollens from there and transfer it to this bagged pistillate flower that we have. So in this way, artificial pollination takes place. Me? Doubts? No. Do you? If you have any doubts, please comment below and I'll surely get back to you. If you like the video, please like, comment and share it with your friends. Also, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel, BioXplaining. Let's keep learning. Thank you. Bye-bye.